Danbury, Connecticut is arguably one of America's most attractive retail markets. Wedged between three of the country's most affluent counties, it regularly leads the state in retail sales and currently carries the lowest unemployment rate in Connecticut.
We are not dependent on any single industry in this town. There are certain areas where, company towns where if that industry gets a flu, the whole area gets a flu. And we have shielded ourselves better than most areas in terms of when you do have economic downturns.
Danbury retailers suffered in the recession like everyone else, but the sector has recovered in the last 18 months as vacant space has slowly started to fill in. But while the town's retail sector is better off than many American centers, the pinch from the digital marketplace is starting to leave its mark, even here.
With over 26,000 square feet, the retail options for this former Borders bookstore in Danbury, Connecticut are becoming increasingly narrow. Having sat vacant since June 2011, its emptiness perhaps provides an even more ominous glimpse into the future of American retail.
Well, whenever you have a space that sits vacant for too long, you do want to try to think of alternate uses. If it's not working, if it's been vacant that long, apparently there's no demand.
While there are always idiosyncratic factors behind a building's inability to find a proper suitor, the fact that the retail space remains empty within Danbury's strong economic pedigree sheds light on larger demographic forces at play. Continued economic uncertainty has not returned U.S. consumption to its former heights, and when it has returned, it's happening more online. While e-commerce receipts only constitute 10% of all retail purchases, Amazon.com saw its sales climb by 23% last year, all of which leaves a giant question mark for the future need for such large retail spaces.
The issue I see going forward and what we see are still, if a big box becomes vacant, the issue with that is most national retailers today are downsizing their footprint. So what are we going to do with a big box?
This concern is shared by credit market investors, as forecasters have predicted that up to 15% of suburban retail centers will close in the next 5 years, sending the proportion of retail properties being put into commercial, mortgage-backed security deals into a slump. Couple this with the recent announcement by Barnes & Noble that it will be closing up to 30% of its stores in the next 10 years, and the future of American retail space gets even foggier.
It's a huge amount of space, and the question is, what happens to it once Barnes & Noble leaves? There are not a lot of other retailers desperate to expand at the moment, so it's quite possible that we're going to see more and more sites that just lie vacant. It's not going to be retail space, it might be turned into something else, or it might just stay dormant.
There are examples of buildings finding a second act. This former Borders in Long Island is now a DSW shoe store, and the neighbor of the Borders in Danbury, Connecticut was once a Circuit City. But some argue that these large empty spaces would be better utilized by service-based industries.
Retailers evolve that way. They come, they go. But
Michael Nimera is the chief economist at the International Council of Shopping Centers, and he says it will be the dynamics of the property and the creativity of its managers that will determine its fate.
And it may be a lot harder than it once was for the development community. But I think the opportunities to get it right are still there, but the tenant mix has to be very different.
When you consider that combined Borders and Circuit City left nearly 1,000 stores and hundreds of thousands of square feet behind when they closed their doors, the scale of the looming retail and e-commerce alteration can seem a bit daunting. But as such a ubiquitous part of the American landscape, it can be difficult to imagine these buildings disappearing. While many of these buildings might be repurposed, in an increasingly digital world, where even groceries and a medical consultation could be obtained online, it seems unlikely that all of the buildings left behind will find a suitor that has the capacity to ride through the transformation. Christopher Booker, Financial Times, Danbury, Connecticut.